Israel's claims that Iran is about to have a nuke are a tired old piece of propaganda, recycled for the last 30 years. Their fears of a genocidal regime having a secret nuclear program is as much a confession as an accusation.
So recently, Ian Carrol had a podcast talking about the truth of Israel's war with Iran, why the US has gotten involved in this, and why, like so many other wars, it's based on lies and hypocrisy. So let's watch and let's react. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
And their stated goal in Iran seems to be moving towards an end goal of just regime change. Netanyahu published this speech after his preemptive strike on Iran over the weekend.
Tonight I wish to speak to you, the proud people of Iran. We're in the midst of one of the greatest military operations in history, Operation Rising Lion. The Islamic regime, which has oppressed you for nearly 50 years, threatens to destroy my country, the State of Israel. The objective of Israel's military operation is to remove this threat, both the nuclear threat and the ballistic missile threat to Israel. And as we achieve our objectives, we're also clearing the path for you to achieve your objective, which is freedom. In the past 24 hours, we've taken out top military commanders, senior nuclear scientists, the Islamic regime's most significant enrichment facility.
And yeah, so many lies already. There is no nuclear weapons threat. We know that. Even Mossad agrees that they don't have that. The US CIA says they don't believe that Iran has that or has reconstituted their program. And yeah, I wouldn't trust the CIA as far as I can throw them, but the CIA is prone to creating the impetus for wars, and they're not in this case. So yeah.
And all the dudes that were involved in peace talks, coincidentally.
And a large portion of its ballistic missile arsenal. More is on the way. The regime doesn't know what hit them. They don't know what will hit them. The nation of Iran and the nation of Israel have been true friends since the days of Cyrus the Great. And the time has come for you to unite around your flag and your historic legacy by standing up for your freedom from an evil and oppressive regime. It has never been weaker. This is your opportunity to stand up and let your voices be heard. Woman, life, freedom. Zan, Zandegi, Azadi. As I said yesterday and many times before, Israel's fight is not with you. It's not with you, the brave people of Iran, whom we respect and admire.
Yeah, they respect and admire them so much that the first strike that Israel made was on a residential district. And it had some of the top brass in the Iranian military. But hey, if you happen to live there and you weren't involved in the government whatsoever and you died, well, I guess you're not so strong or brave in the eyes of Netanyahu anymore.
Our fight is with our common enemy, a murderous regime that both oppresses you and impoverishes you.
Yeah, I mean, okay, like, his fight is not with them, and they can tell, because he's bombing them. So, note how he claims he is addressing the Iranian people, but he's speaking in English. Yeah, you can always tell when Netanyahu is spouting propaganda because he speaks in English.
Yes, this is so true. Every single time to draw the US in. This is absolutely accurate.
Because he is speaking to you, the American people, for our benefit. He's trying to portray himself as liberating the people of Iran from their oppressive regime. And certainly, the government in Iran is horribly oppressive and in every way worthy of condemnation. But let's remember how Iran wound up with that regime in the first place, shall we? Because, you see, if you're not familiar, this all started back in the founding years of the CIA and Israel in 1953, when the CIA backed a coup with millions of taxpayer dollars that overthrew the democratically elected prime minister of Iran, Mohammad Mossadegh. They didn't overthrow him because he was building nukes or killing Jews or anything crazy like that. They overthrew him because he was nationalizing Iran's oil and stopping Shell Oil from exploiting the Iranian people and their resources for Western benefit. So for the crime of putting his own people's interests first, he was overthrown and eventually put in prison. The Western deep state installed their puppet, the Shah of Iran, who ruled with a dictatorial hand that grew more and more oppressive over the years until it eventually led to the Iranian Revolution.
Indeed, in regard to that, just quick moment of clarity, he set up essentially a police state and a surveillance state, and this pissed off many of the fundamentalists that would eventually rally around Khomeini and take power in the 78 and 79 revolution. And this is directly because of the regime change operation that the U.S. implemented with the help of the British in Operation Ajax in 1953.
That revolutionary movement built throughout the Shah's rule until it reached a fever pitch in 1978, with Ayatollah Khomeini emerging as the figurehead of it. The revolutionary spirit of the Iranian people was met with massacres of civilians by the Shah's government. The people of Iran organized a massive striking movement that culminated in a nationwide general strike and crippled the country. And all throughout, the U.S. government funded the brutally oppressive puppet government that they had installed, as is our habit all around the world, ever since America rose to global dominance in the early 20th century.
And that's the truth. The U.S. has propped up so many dictatorships around the world for the simple fact that they happen to oppose other dictatorships that the U.S. wants to topple. The one that comes to mind the quickest is Syria, where under Operation Timber Sycamore, the U.S. poured in money to support al-Qaeda forces in their fight against Assad. They were spreading propaganda that Assad gassed his own people and poses a serious threat to the United States, but really it was only Israel. And guess what? If you're an America First patriot, who's more threatening? Al-Qaeda, who attacked us on 9/11, or Assad, who can't touch us? It was preposterous to get involved in that, and the U.S. gets involved in so many of these catastrophes because they pick winners and losers among the despotic class. It's just so absurd, but it's played out time and time again. In Libya, the same thing happened. Now, Gaddafi's weapons got dispersed throughout sub-Saharan Africa, and they have open slave trade markets there. So that's what happens when you get involved in these wars. And that wasn't even the worst of them. In Afghanistan and Iraq, there were 20-plus year occupations that sucked out enormous money from the treasury, created inflation, sent our soldiers home in body bags, many of them with PTSD as well, the ones that survived. It was just all calamity.
Maybe having something to do with the Federal Reserve, but I digress. So, millions of Iranians took to the street in protest in 1978, and eventually they won out. The Shah of Iran was ousted from the government and forced to flee the country and go into hiding. Iran eventually went through a series of political power struggles before settling into its current state as the Islamic Republic of Iran in 1979. It has been a bastion of some of the most extreme aspects of Islam ever since. That is how we got to where we're at today. It was because of Western regime change that Iran hates the West. It was because of Israeli and American oppression that they chant death to America and death to Israel. Does that mean that I sympathize with them and think that they're in the right? No, of course not. But should knowing that color your perspective on Western action against Iran today and what the best course of action is right now? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The result of the regime change was the catastrophic regime that they're selling now as kind of an existential threat. You know, this is the Hitler of the Middle East. They always say the latest CIA boogeyman is Hitler, the one they want to topple. Netanyahu's latest foe is always Hitlerian in some way. And these chants, the whole problem with chants is like conservatives adopting wokeism and saying words are violence, essentially. Well, Iran hasn't really attacked the United States at all. They don't have the capability to. They don't have the delivery system to attack the United States. Even if they have, and I don't concede they have at all, because all signs say they don't, a nuclear weapon. So this whole thing's preposterous, and literally you had the warmongers and the neocons prescribing a regime change to fix a regime that was ushered in through regime change. So that's where we're at. Inception regime change in foreign policy. It's really ridiculous.
Absolutely. As we mentioned at the start of this episode, Israel's strike against Iran came the day before Trump had talks scheduled with Iran that promised to be a genuine step towards peace and de-escalation. At least, that's what they appeared to promise. Now, Trump is even going along with the narrative that it was all a ruse to get Iran to lower their guard, which is such a short-sighted undermining of our future diplomatic action. It is absurd. Like, do you think that the next guy will want to sit down for peace talks with America? Do you think that when China is invited to the table for peace talks or North Korea is threatening nuclear strikes, do you think that they're going to feel like they can trust us to negotiate in good faith? when they watched what happened to Iran when they were foolish enough to take America at her word? It's damn near treason for Trump to talk like that.
Yeah, I totally agree on this point. I'm so glad he's pointing it out, specifically because of how much it jeopardizes any aspirations of hope for peace in Ukraine, too. Iran is a BRICS power. It's an ally of Russia. And Putin's watching this. The whole world's watching this and how America operates, this twisted, underhanded diplomacy where you dupe a regime into complacency and by thinking that there's legitimate negotiations going on, and then at some point you just align yourself with Netanyahu's Israel or Iran strike that he's always wanted, which is the impetus for regime change, which he also has always wanted. Ian's exactly right here.
Not only was he elected on the promise of peace, the promise that he would not take America to any more foreign wars, but then he goes out and not only gets us into the exact war we wanted to stay out of, he does so in the most slimy, short-sighted way imaginable. The blowback from this decision will play out for many decades to come, and no one today can predict how bad the consequences might be for us and for the whole world. And so, Bibi thinks that he's going to perform regime change in Iran. He thinks that his floppy-eared ass is going to inspire Iranians to take up arms and overthrow their government as he rains destruction down on their heads. But the BBC points out that even if those in Iran that would overthrow the regime took action, and certainly there are plenty of people in Iran that hate the regime, but those with the most power by a wide margin are hardliners. Some of them are even more extreme than the leadership that was just wiped out. Based on Bibi's words about revolution, I can only assume that Mossad and probably the CIA are already hard at work fomenting such a revolution, and so they must have a candidate in mind to step in and save the day. Some point to the former Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, who is the son of the former Shah, as their likely candidate. He lives in exile and has been actively trying to gain support for his cause. He also was visiting Israel recently, but do you really think that Iran is going to want the son of the dude that they overthrew for being a Western puppet that was a brutal dictator murdering and imprisoning civilians? Do you think that they're going to want him to lead their new revolution?
Yeah, it's really hard to believe that the Iranians are going to rise up and help overthrow this government when they've been struck first. Now, it is true that there are some pro-Western forces within Iran that, you know, Iran was more of a pro-Western haven before the Islamic Revolution in 78 and 79. You can see all those pictures. If you Google Iran in the 60s and 70s, they're all over the place. Iran was a different place, but it was a reaction to the surveillance state and the police state that was set up by Pahlavi that provoked that revolution. So, I don't think that there's any hope that that will happen, even if the U.S. gets involved in regime change underhanded and by these clandestine efforts to arm rebels or what have you. There's no way to really sell a revolution when Israel's the one that attacked Iran. So,
yeah, I don't think so. So it's important to remember, as Israel is busy kicking off World War III over in the Middle East, there is still an elephant in the room. And his name is Jeffrey Epstein. And he clearly worked for Israeli intelligence, gathering compromising blackmail on powerful US and European politicians, corporate executives, and celebrities. After all, Alex Acosta was told that he worked for intelligence and to leave him alone. And by now, I've heard some pretty retarded takes, mostly all from Jewish Zionists trying to distract from the obvious, like he worked for Saudi Arabia, or Qatar, or MI6, or the CIA. Thinking a whole network of Jewish billionaires were working for Qatar is comical on absolutely every level, and it's a clear indicator that you're not to be taken seriously about anything.
Yeah, I'm not so definitively sure he was a Mossad agent. I think that is very likely based on his background, his connections not only to Robert Maxwell, but also Lex Wexner, both of which had connections to the Israeli government. What he said about Acosta is true. Acosta said that. And, lots of questions have raised because of it. Really great book on this called One Nation Under Blackmail by Whitney Webb. It's a spectacular book. I recommend you read it. But, it's very possible that he was working for Mossad, for sure. The blackmail operations would be powerful upon our politicians. And, he had a safe that was containing CDs and DVDs that were set up with people's names printed on them, presumably blackmail, with CCTVs all over his property. So you can kind of connect the dots from there. His relations and the Occam's razor tells you that he was probably Mossad.
And if you think that a bunch of Jewish billionaires were working for the CIA and not for Israel, well, then you only need scroll through Jewish billionaire Twitter feeds today, like Bill Ackman's, for example, to see where their loyalties always seem to fall. To Israel first and to America second. But if you wanted more evidence, you might notice that Ehud Barak, the former prime minister of Israel and ex-head of Israeli military intelligence, visited Epstein more than 30 times in the course of 4 years, often at regularly scheduled monthly intervals, sneaking in and out of Epstein's residences. And surely, you could hypothesize that Ehud liked to diddle kids and was being blackmailed. But is that really why you think that the head of Israeli military intelligence was meeting with Epstein? Like, really? Because Epstein was bankrolled by Leslie Wexner, one of the richest and most prominent Jewish Zionists in the world.
True.
And not only was Epstein using Wexner's Victoria's Secret to mask his recruitment operations, but we learned last year that Wexner's other fashion brand, Abercrombie & Fitch, was also involved in trafficking operations of male models. I did a whole report on it in my last week on Candace. Wexner was also a founding member of the Mega Group, which was a secretive organization of Jewish Zionist billionaires like Wexner and the Lauders, the Bronfmans, and other prominent, powerful Jews like Steven Spielberg and Lawrence Tisch. Not a lot is known about the Mega Group, but all evidence indicates that it was some sort of front, I guess, for clandestine Israeli espionage activity masked as Jewish philanthropy. And then there was Monica Lewinsky, the Jewish woman who entrapped the president of the United States in a blowjob scandal that nearly toppled his presidency. It's pretty weird timing that just so happened to be at the height of Epstein's sexual blackmail operations, right as Bill was moving towards those Oslo peace accords. And I know, holy smokes, slow down with the Jewish conspiracy theories, Ian. You're some sort of anti-Semite? I mean, come on, you can't just assume that Monica Lewinsky was part of the Epstein network just because she's Jewish. Correct. You cannot assume that. And even though Bill Clinton was one of Epstein's primary targets, and Epstein visited the White House 17 times that we know of during the Clinton presidency, you still can't assume that the two are related. But then, when you dig into it a bit, you learn that somehow Netanyahu wound up with recordings of Bill Clinton and Monica having phone sex. How the hell did Bibi get them? It was reported in the Times of Israel that Mossad had collected some 30 hours worth of phone sex conversations. It was even alleged that Netanyahu tried to blackmail Clinton with those tapes in exchange for the release of Jonathan Pollard.
Yeah, this is a angle of this story that is not well known, but there are many lingering questions about how Mossad wound up with those tapes. You know, Ian's laying out a case that it was Epstein. Maybe it was, especially if Epstein was a Mossad agent, which I think is likely. Maybe that's true.
If you don't know about Jonathan Pollard, well, let's just say that Israel has a long history of infiltrating and conducting espionage against the American government. So, who knows? Maybe Monica Lewinsky had nothing to do with Epstein, but
I don't think he's right. I think Israel is our closest ally in the Middle East. They would never spy on us. They would never have espionage on us. They would never try to blackmail our politicians. So I don't see how this can be right.
It sure is weird that while this apparent Israeli sexual blackmail operation has its claws in Clinton, and he, 17 times in the White House, and he's doing stuff that they don't like peace, he just so happens to have a sex tape scandal that's wildly embarrassing. Almost like someone was firing a warning shot at him. I mean, imagine what else they might have had on tape.
Well, I don't think it's quite accurate to say what he had going on was peace. That is considered a peacetime era in the United States, but consider this. In that peacetime era, he fired missiles at Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq, maintained a no-fly zone in Iraq, and the Balkan Wars. And there were some others involved in there too. That was peacetime in the United States. How sad is that? I think I listed 5 or 6 countries. There was probably more where there were military interventions, but we didn't exactly have peace in the way that I would consider it, at least. I mean, I'm with Ian mostly here, but that I don't quite agree with.
Bill, But of course, it's not just Clinton. Epstein's known, alleged, and suspected targets are many of the most powerful men in America and Europe. Government, finance, culture, you name it. And basically his entire network was composed of Jewish Zionists, Israelis, and even Israeli spies. Ari Ben-Menashe, an actual ex-Israeli intelligence officer, even directly claimed on record that Epstein worked for Israeli intelligence. Robert Maxwell, a known Mossad operative by all indications, recruited and trained Epstein. Ronald Lauder, Leslie Wexner, Glenn Dubin were all tied to him through close personal and financial relationships. Ehud Barak himself checked in on Epstein monthly, a lot like a handler would. And to this day, not only is Epstein's blackmail still in play, but so are his financial movements. Whitney Webb has long reported on Epstein's ties to Peter Thiel and the technocratic surveillance industry through companies like Carbine 911 and Palantir, and it was recently reported by even the New York Times that in 2015 and 2016, Jeffrey Epstein invested $40 million with a venture capital firm founded by Peter Thiel. Now, seeing as Peter Thiel currently has his hand just about as far up the ass of the Trump administration as is humanly possible, that feels particularly relevant today. Although it remains to be seen exactly whose ass he's the furthest up, just about every single tech CEO in America today had some level of association with him, both before and after his first arrest and conviction for soliciting prostitution from a minor in Florida.
The Palantir connection is especially concerning because Palantir is working on a program that collaborates with the state to collate all the data on individuals within the country unconstitutionally. I thought we had something called the Fourth Amendment. Of course, the TSA violates that every single day. Unreasonable searches and seizures up the wazoo there, but we're supposed to have that. And Palantir is developing a concerning expansion of the surveillance state. It's not getting a ton of news coverage. A lot of it, was confined to a few days, a few weeks ago, but that's really alarming.
Then, of course, there's Donald Trump. And listen, I don't know if Trump ever abused any kids with or without Epstein. I don't know if all the allegations against him are as retarded and underthought as that one old lady he allegedly groped in the New York fitting room or not. But I do know that Trump bought the Plaza Hotel, even financially overextended himself at the time to do it, that hotel, he surely had been told by his mentor Roy Cohn, was the hub of mob blackmail in the 40s and 50s when the mob and the blackmailed FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, were throwing cross-dressing gay sex orgies in the Blue Suite there. All of it was wired up with secret cameras recording reams of compromat on powerful political and social elites of the day. And I also know that Trump bought Adnan Khashoggi's boat and renamed it the Trump Princess. And that boat was notorious for being wired up with secret cameras used by Khashoggi to acquire blackmail on powerful people who he plied with liquor, drugs, whatever it was, boys and girls, you name it. If you ask me, Trump looks more like a dude who collected blackmail than a dude who was blackmailed, but that's speculation, no proof, and it's proof we'll likely never get.
Yeah, it is true that Trump had a very close relationship with Epstein. At one point, Epstein called Trump essentially his best friend, and they remained very close in the 90s and 2000s. However, all the evidence I've seen points to a decisive rift between the two in, I believe, 2004, and it was over the bidding on real estate in Florida. Essentially, they both wanted the same property, bid each other up, and both of them became bitter at each other afterward. And there's not much evidence after that they, had any kind of communication thereafter. That does not work with a lot of the timeline in terms of the charges that were being levied at Epstein, if you believe that that's when their relationship broke off. But that's all I want to say. I don't know for sure, but there are indications of a definitive schism between the two.
When I voted for Trump, I chose to look past those questions in hopes that Trump would keep us out of war in the Middle East, close our borders, and maybe deal with some of the financial and social turmoil here at home. Even just a small slice of making America less fucked up again would have been better than the alternative in my mind. Instead, now Trump seems to be every bit as much in on the deep staters' plot to enslave us all with digital surveillance and conquer the world for Israel as the next stooge. I mean, Trump really did have everything teed up for a home run, for the most historic American presidency in a century. He could have cemented his name next to like JFK and Lincoln and Washington. All deeply flawed men, yes, but despite the whitewash history, remembered for their greatness, for what they did for America. Trump was this close, like this close. All he needed to do was prosecute any one or two or a few of Jeffrey Epstein's known associates for their crimes, close the border, and kick out the illegal immigrants, and maybe not start any new wars.
That's asking way too much in Washington. I think that's way too idealistic. And, I wasn't really on the Trump train, but, it's gone pretty south pretty fast. And, there were indications of it from the get-go, bombing Yemen, the rift with Musk, and now this. And I think this is going to jeopardize the rest of his agenda. I don't feel strongly about a lot of the other parts of his agenda, like the protective tariffs and such, but I really think that if you're Trump and you want the president to succeed in pushing some of that forward, getting into a new Middle East war is literally the worst thing you can do. It's literally number one on the list that can tank your presidency. It's this. And it tanked George W. Bush's presidency. He never had the political capital that he did in his first term and the second. And, he has to live with the stain that is Iraq, probably one of the biggest foreign policy debacles in our history. So Trump's flirting with that right now. He's already involved to some extent in this new war. I guess we'll have to see how far it gets pushed.
Turns out that MAGA was really MAGA all along. But on the bright side, every day the veil of Israeli Hasbara disintegrates more and more. Every day more people wake up to just how obvious and careless the Israeli propaganda campaign that has ruled the West for decades has become. For example, last year, Thomas Massie, who I'm told works for China, told Chatsworth Carlson about how everyone in Congress has an AIPAC handler.
Chatsworth Carlson. Ian cracks me up, man, how he injects this stuff. This is good stuff.
Everybody but me has an AIPAC person.
What's that mean, an AIPAC person?
It's like your babysitter, your AIPAC babysitter, who is always talking to you for AIPAC. They're probably a constituent in your district, but they are firmly embedded in AIPAC. And
every member has something like this?
That's how it works on the Republican side. And when they come to DC, you go have lunch with them. And they've got your cell number, and you have conversations with them.
That's absolutely crazy.
I've had 4 members of Congress say, I'll talk to my AIPAC person. And it's literally what we call them, my AIPAC guy. I'll talk to my AIPAC guy and see if I can get him to dial those ads back.
Why have I never heard this before?
Why would they want to tell their constituents that they've basically got a buddy system with somebody who's representing a foreign country? It doesn't benefit the congressman for people to know that, so they're not going to tell you that.
And now,
yeah, protect this man at all costs. Massie is a hero, and by the way, I love that ominous music during it. Really, Massie exposed the Israel lobby's game there in a way that had rarely been done before. You couldn't get that on the corporate media. When MSNBC and CNN and Fox News ruled the world, they're never going to allow that on their programming. So when Massie revealed that, it really struck a chord and opened a lot of people's eyes, I think, in a way that they had never been before on the Israel lobby. If you want a really good book on this, read John Mearsheimer's book called The Lobby. It's fantastic. But Massie's the greatest, and the Israel influence in our government is, pretty pervasive. And I think JFK was right when he wanted to get the AZS, which was the precursor body to AIPAC, the American Zionist Council, to register as a foreign lobby. That's what they are. They can say it's our constituents in the U.S., but they're collaborating with a foreign government to represent that foreign government in our government. It doesn't get more, treasonous than that.
Israel's unregistered foreign bribery committee is out here posting propaganda so retarded that you'd have to be Mitch McConnell to believe it. Quote, mass murder of civilians is Iran's strategy. Preventing this vicious regime from having a nuclear weapon is a necessity for Israel and the world.
Just think of that tweet. Just look at that tweet. Mass murder of civilians is Iran's strategy. This was likely written during the bloodbath in Gaza, the genocide. And if you don't think it's a genocide, whatever. I think the important question is the U.S. should not be bankrolling this murderous massacre that's happened. They basically cleared Rafah out to rubble. 200 million possibly people displaced. There's 2 million people in Gaza. Up to 100,000 people have died. There were only 35,000 Hamas before this bloodbath. Hamas is completely broken. There's only about 15,000. And you see children pulled out of the rubble daily. So what just an asinine tweet to make.
And we've got Israelis complaining about how men and women and children have to spend the whole night in tiny bomb shelters. He literally says, quote, "No one deserves to live like this." Bitch, look at Gaza. Look at it. I'm sorry. Mass murder of civilians is Iran's strategy? Then what the fuck do you call this?
Exactly.
Oh, and by the way, these men, women, and children, they didn't have bomb shelters to hide in, Yuri. They died. They watched their families and their friends die. They watched their home be reduced to a wasteland. They had nowhere to go. They didn't even have food or water for most of it because your government thought it wasn't enough to bomb the entire place to rubble, so you also restricted food and water from entering, causing untold more to starve to death. You evil, whiny pieces of shit. I'm trying very hard to maintain empathy for Israeli civilians caught in the crossfire of this war. But oh boy, is it hard after we have spent the last 2 years watching you all treat genocide like a spectator sport to be cheered for.